locked up. There's a gate, there's a
Well, I
fence
know
up
since the
there.
fires, they don't want anybody out there. I know that. But you can walk, I mean, I've walked in there before. The gate's usually locked. You have to get special permission if you actually want to go in there, to drive in there. But you could walk in there.
Is it still intact?
The original adobe itself was built, they built a building around it. And then it became like a hunting lodge. They took it over and it was a hunting lodge. They even have like a swimming pool out front, but that's all filled in now. And then the last, there in the orchard there was like a 150-year-old grapevine, and it got destroyed at the last fire. Yeah, that was sad.
Is that federal government on that now?
Yes. Yeah, it's part of the Los Padres National Forest. Yes.
Is there a history of war or conflict among the Central Coast Native peoples?
For some reason, what I've just been told, I've never read it anywhere, but I've been told for some reason we didn't get along with the Chumash. And there's some Chumash we don't get along with today. But they said the Yokuts, we already got, we're fine with the Yokut people and the Esalen.
You mentioned Toro Creek as being a place where your ancestors were. Is that all the way from the coast back up across what is now 41? Or
Yeah, well, that was the old route before they put 41 in. That was the old road that, and if halfway where the halfway station is, that's where the road where you go in.
But did that describe the area that your people were located in?
Yeah, it was most,
Toro Creek?
yes, it was more the headwaters than the coast, even though along Toro Creek there's lots of sites. And when you get to Highway 1 is a huge site, an older site.
I don't know how far the headwaters go. That would be to the south of 41.
But it's where that halfway station is, and it's off of that road. I've never been there, but it's close to that area there. So it's not really on the coast, it's more up the canyon from the coast, on Toro Creek.
One of our members described to me one time that there was a family that lived up in that area toward the top of, if you go out Santa Rita Road and go all the way top, up in that area there was a family that lived up in there into the 40s. It was a Salinan family.
And it might have been part of this group.
Yeah, they were forcibly removed. I don't remember what year.
Well, this was the 30s when they were forcibly removed, but some of them might have hung out.
What he's talking about, my dad used to live out in Santa Rita Canyon when he was a teenager. And the family in Toro Creek would take their horse and buggy and come here to Hewitt's hardware store, bring their honey. And to get money, they had honeybees. And they put it in 5-gallon cans.
Wow.
Like this, with a screw lid. And they stopped at my dad's place to water the horse. Because from up there to Templeton is quite a ways. So then the government made him move out, and they moved to Atascadero. And there was 2 brothers and a sister. And I think their last name was Moses.
Roses. There's like Jim Roses that I've seen pictures.
So,
And then I've seen Maria Bailon, and Bailon might have been her married name.
so then, in about 1939 or 40, Dad took us up there in a Jeep to where their house was, and they had 3 little houses along there at the headwaters of Toro Creek. And this one little house had a hole in the ground this big around, like 6 inches, and the water comes straight up there, and that was the headwaters of Toro Creek.
Wow.
It ran to Toro Creek and then down into the ocean.
So they had a nice water source there then.
Oh, yeah. And their little house was still there, but the front door of it was broken off from the wind. So we went in the little house, and their clothes were still hanging on the walls.
Well, like I said, they came up with Tommy guns, you know, machine guns, and yeah, how much time do you have to leave when
That's
somebody's
right.
pointing a
So-
gun at you?
So up on a big bald hill, there's a great big cross up there. And Dad told us that's their cemetery on this tall hill. So we walked into the little house and the rats had moved in, chewed everything up. And they had apple boxes, wooden apple boxes for their shelves all around the room.
Oh, okay.
It was a one-room building. And so there was 2 cigar boxes that were laying on the floor. One of them, when it fell off, the lid popped open and the rats chewed all the pictures up. The other one, when it fell off, went the other way. So I saw it there and I picked it up.
So you're the one that got all the pictures. Thank you. No, that was great. He had sent me the pictures.
The Indians told on me. No, so I picked it up, and all these pictures are in it. So I said, asked Dad, I says, can I take this home? Dad said, sure, the rats are gonna eat it. I still got the cigar box and the pictures.
Wow. And I said we have descendants from the families that lived there. I saw the pictures. Some of the pictures I've seen in different books that were in that, but some I hadn't seen before. And some of the people I weren't sure who they were. Some I recognized.
And there's a family standing in front of the house with 3 little kids.
Yeah, that's wonderful. No, that's great. Thank you.
I didn't rat
That's
you out,
neat.
Jim, you just ratted yourself out.
Yeah. Hey, that's all right. That's all right. You saved some historical objects.
What was the form of leadership in the tribes, and how did they hand down property? Because obviously their land was taken from them because they had no paperwork. But how did the people in the tribe know what land belonged to them? Did they hand them down to oldest, youngest? Did they separate it equally? What was the
Well, it usually
leadership
was like all I know is there was each family group that had a certain land, and I'm sure maybe they squabbled, said, hey, I want that spot, you know. But I'm not sure. I've never read anything. But all I
Was it
know,
like
it's
it
usually
goes
a
to the
different
oldest
family
son or
groups
anything?
that had, and then there's extended families.
Okay.
So it would have gotten larger. And then usually it was, like I said, the elder in the family that would handle squabbles or anything that came up. Or if there was something from another family group in their village, they had an issue with them, then the elders from that village would come and they discuss things with the elder of this village. But I'm sure they would probably say, okay, you're marrying whoever you're marrying, and I can't remember if it's sure if the woman went to the men's village or if the men, I think the women went to the man's village. So I'm sure that the elder would say, okay, well, you're gonna put your hut over here. I'm sure they had say of where you were going, unless you wanted to leave the village and go head out on your own and start your own little, but a village would have been more safe because you had more individuals.
Did they ever have surnames early on?
Like I said, we had the name Agata Maria, and a lot of, when you go into mission records, you go into mission documents, most of the names were changed. A lot of them, they didn't say what their original names were.
Well,
They just-
pre-European, did they have surnames?
Yes, a lot of them, as soon as you came in, not really surnames, but first names. They were just saying, because you would have taken on, especially if you married a Spanish or something, you would take his last name. But most of the documents show that their names were Maria or Jose. Those are the names you were given. Some of the names, Indian names, was Apollo, was one of the names. Usually no last names, just most of them were single names. So you have Agata Maria, which obviously the missions gave her that last name. You have Apollo. I can't think of the other ones. But they would just be single names. But most of them were changed, so we're not really sure. And then in the documents too, a lot of it, we were lucky it stated what village they came from. That's why we know, we always thought Perfecta was a Salinan. But until we actually dove into the mission documents, it says that she was taken from the village of Sumtashi with her parents. Then we know that's the Tashi Yokuts. So then we realized, oh, she's Yokut, but she was brought to Mission San Miguel and then married Pedro Ensenales, who was a Salinan.
And doing a little bit of research, and we'll close it here, about how Templeton was formed. You gotta remember where Patty went back and talked about the rancheros being divided. Well, my guess would be is they didn't have deeds back in the native Indian days. You just had this area of land. And so when the ranchos were divided up and then taken over by the Mexican government, and then those were then sold to the, in our case, the Blackburn brothers, there was no paper trail beyond the ranchos because they didn't, I assume they didn't put, I own this property, because
Yeah.
from the folklore I've heard is that the land was everybody's. I mean, it wasn't something you owned, you just lived on. So it'd be real hard to prove that you owned land if there was no record of it, because there was no, that was not part of the customs.
No.
But I got a question, if you guys have ever talked about it. You said that the Salinians, the federal government kind of ran out of either money or steam by the time they got to the West Coast to put you guys on reservations. Was that a blessing or a curse? Because had you been put on a reservation, there'd have been, the culture probably would have stayed more intact than just being, you know, simulated into. Do you have any sense of that?
I know, I thought about that a lot. And actually, I think it was in 19, I can't even think of his name. The federal government sent someone out to California to actually document the Indian tribes. And this was part of when they put them on reservations. And there was actually 3 areas that they identified, but they only identified them. They identified Plato, which is now under San Antone Lake. They identified Milpitas, and Manchester Canyon, and those are all towards Lockwood and Halone area. So those have been identified, which actually helps with our federal recognition. They were identified as Indian communities. Toro Creek wasn't, probably because they couldn't find it. But it's hard to say. It's very hard to say. You know, that they couldn't find us, which was kind of a good way at a certain time. It probably would be nice, you know, because you get benefits and you get other things. Our tribal members can go down to the Santa Ynez Clinic and be seen there. They recognize us.
And also, you'd have land too. The
Well, yeah, we would
reservation
have
on
land, which we don't have land.
Yeah, I know, living in Oregon, the Warm Spring Federation is, and when we first moved up there maybe 50 years ago, the government had taken part of their land away, which is full of trees, so very, very valuable, and they got that back. It was a huge thing, and they got all this land back. We went to court and they won.
And that's probably if we ever do get federal recognition, which is, who knows, it could take another 50 years.
Yeah.
Their job is not to, because then they have to give you benefits.
Do something.
They don't want to do that. But it will probably be by Camp Roberts or Fort Hunter Lick, and I'm sure they will give us a portion of that. But, you know, you can't say it didn't happen. So it probably, and most of the reservations you look at are so poverty. You know, there's no jobs, there's none of this stuff. This kind of forced our people to go out and get jobs and get a call, and get, you know. But we still have
Jim had a question.
we still have our own issues.
I want to share something. There was a family that lived over here on Santa Rita Road, and his last name was Plum. And he was married to a white lady, and they had 7 kids. And he was 100% Salinan Indian, and my dad knew him real well. And so he'd go down to the creek, and he'd get roots down on the creek. He'd boil the roots and make tea, and he actually could cure cancer. And-
They're finding out, they're doing a lot of biology on these healing plants, and a lot of them are wonderful for that, you know,
So-
and
his kid-
infections that can't be healed, they're healing those infections.
So when his kids left the house, and they had settled on Plum, they all went to Templeton schools and married people in this area. He had 3 people come in and live in the house that had cancer. And in 2.5 months, he could cure cancer. When they were done, he'd get more to come in there, and that's how he made money. And
Wow.
And it really worked. Have you ever
I'm
heard?
trying to think of the route it would be.
I don't, but his last name was Plum.
Well, I don't recognize that name. I recognize Mora, if anybody
Oh, yeah.
knew Lawrence. We had David Mora that's a Salinan.
And another lady here that was a pure 100% was Mrs. Ballesteros.
Yes, Ballesteros, yes, I know
She was
her.
100%.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
thank you so much.